So, hello everybody, thank you again for being here. And I'm really happy now to introduce the next panel with David Carroll, Bernd, and Marloes de Valk, moderated by Theresa Züger. The title of the panel is Targeted, Profiled and Influenced on Cambridge Analytica and Beyond. And I'm so happy that Theresa is the moderator because in a sense is our long friend since many years of the Disruption Network Club. She has been also here in the event Truth Teller moderating, so is a great presence for us, and I'm so satisfied to introduce you again. Theresa is the project lead of the Media Policy Lab, a project by the Media Authority Berlin-Brandenburg. She has also worked a lot as curator and moderator, for example, for the Transmediale Festival in 2016, and also Repubblica recently. And she is an associate researcher of the Alexander von Humboldt Institute for Internet and Society, that is also our cooperation partner. And Theresa holds a PhD from the Humboldt University of Berlin that is focusing on digital forms of civil disobedience. And in particular, she has been working and analyzing a lot the subject of whistleblowing, the Snowden leaks, and she's also a board member of the Whistleblower Network of Germany. So thank you very much, and I'm really looking forward to this panel, especially today, that I would say it's an important day for the German regulation of private data and general data, so I think we will speak a lot about that too. Thank you, and also thanks for the all speakers that are here.
Yes, hello to all of you. And thank you, Tatiana, for this very, very sweet introduction. Thank you very much. Yes, in this panel, we're going to speak about political manipulation and computational propaganda. And in preparing this panel, at some moments I felt when I was reading what the great three speakers that I will introduce in just a minute were thinking about to present here, there was this moment where all of that sounded very, very scary to me. And as a political researcher, when I have one of those short scared moments, I asked Hannah Arendt what she might think about this. And I went back to something she wrote in the 70s called Lying in Politics. And there she reminds us that lying in politics is really nothing new. And propaganda is something that humans have been exposed to for centuries. So it's something that we know, but there is also a very new quality to the propaganda that we're seeing online today. And in this panel, we want to dismantle and better understand what we're actually facing. And I have three wonderful speakers that will help me to do this, and I think we're going to have something like a three-step argument here, or a three-step into better understanding what is going on. And my first speaker is, I think, very much analyzing recent cases for us tonight, so kind of explaining the status quo of what is possible in political targeting and political manipulation. That's David Carroll. He's an associate professor of the media and design at the Parsons School, which is part of the New School in New York. And there he researches at the intersections between advertising, journalism, politics, data, algorithms, and user experience. So very, very broad intersection of important issues to what we're looking at tonight. And he is challenging, he was the one actually bringing up the Cambridge Analytica case, challenging them with a trial. And so he will speak about what happened and how we came where we stand today, and understand this also in a broader political perspective. And my second speaker today will be Bernd, who is a hacker and security expert from the Holland Stiftung. He actually is one of the founders and still a board member of the Holland Stiftung, and he was one of the very early members of the CCC. And Bernd will talk a lot about cybernetics, which is taking a very systematic approach in understanding what is going on and trying to see a deeper pattern. So Bernd will be the person trying to give us a bigger picture of where this is leading us and what we might be able to do about it. And my third speaker then will give us a more artistic perspective on these things. Marloes de Valk, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, is a software artist and writer from the Netherlands. She's also teaching at the Piet Zwart Institute in Rotterdam. And she's looking, I really like how she's described here, so I will just quote this. As a writer in the post-despair stage of coping with the threat of global warming and being spied on by the devices surrounding her. So we will understand a few of those coping strategies, I hope, but we will also learn about the strategies of the industry behind what is going on with political manipulation. So now I would like to start with the presentations in this order. So Carroll, David, the next 25 minutes are yours. Sure. Thank you.
Hello, I'm very happy to be here today. It's a very interesting day, perhaps even a glorious day. It's been referred to in the previous keynote. It's GDPR Day in the world, and it's very fitting and wonderful for me to be here in Germany, Germany being the first nation to pass a data protection law. And some people say that, you know, it is Germans' history, the fresh memory of why preventing a surveillance state is essential for democracy. So I'm going to talk today about oh, here's the clicker. Thank you. There we go. So we're going to start out mentioning my data quest, which is my effort to repatriate my voter file from a foreign military contractor that interfered in my election in the United States of America. And I've made some significant progress on that, and I'll be talking about what we've learned from that process and what the implications are. Also going to focus on this idea that we're dealing with entirely new threat models to election integrity, and the intersections between them are significant. So, of course, countries have been meddling in each other's elections for a long time, but this is the first, the 2016 election was the first when technology was used and data was used in a particular way. We also have the first instance of international campaign vendors. So a campaign hired an international company to do its work. Prior to that, this industry had been totally domestic and totally civilian. And then, of course, the other problem is arbitrageurs. That is just simply scammers, fraudsters, who are exploiting the economics and have no political agenda, but have figured out that political discourse is very inflammatory and highly profitable. And this is probably symbolized best by the sort of now infamous Macedonians who made fake news sites and made a lot of money stoking partisanship in the United States. Of course, this sort of resolves to understanding that we're in a state of information warfare and will be for the foreseeable future. And how do we deal with that? Of course, it resolves to the story of Cambridge Analytica as a focal point and as an example, but it's certainly not the only company that is doing these things. And then, of course, interesting how the GDPR itself may inhibit the exploitation of the ecology and to improve the sort of health of information on the internet and get some of the junk off the internet in favor of a safer environment. Just this week, Tristan Harris, who's the founder of the Center for Humane Technology, gave evidence to UK Parliament's Select Committee on Fake News and Disinformation, and I found this quote from his testimony to be really interesting. I'll read it. I think that we have to see that there are many different issues emerging out of the attention economy. The externalities range from public health, addiction, culture, children's well-being, mental well-being, loneliness, sovereignty of identity, and things like that. Elections, democracy, truth, discernment of truth, and a shared reality, antitrust, and power. There are multiple issues. There are even more because when you control the minds of people, you control society. How people make sense of the world and how they make choices are what identity is, and how that can affect every aspect of society. So it's not just the convergence of these three new threat models, but the business model, the technology itself of attention harvesting is a key dynamic that affects many parts of our lives. So I'll try to run through a quick three-part exposition of what we built, how we got here, and where we're going. Doing two clickers here. So at the turn of the 20th century, a sort of apocryphal department store magnate named John Wanamaker he is said to have said that half the money I spend on advertising is wasted. The trouble is I don't know which half. And indeed, this has plagued, a business person knows advertising works, but doesn't know why it works and hates spending money on it. And so a significant imperative of the technology industry at the turn of the 21st century was the creation of online behavioral advertising, which fundamentally changed the model of advertising from putting ads in places and buying placements to instead buying eyeballs. And ads were targeted to individuals as people, as meat, rather than putting an ad in a magazine or on a billboard. And it led to the creation of an elaborate ecosystem of ad tech. These are venture-backed companies, mostly based in New York, California, and Tel Aviv. And it is a dizzying array of intermediaries and middlemen transferring data to make ads appear on the page. And ordinary users have no idea what's hidden beneath the surface when they visit a page, and the dozens or hundreds of companies that are synchronizing and sharing data about us, the hidden layer beneath the web. And especially, people don't have the expectation when they are looking at a health site that a company like Experian is tracking their behavior looking at health information, the same company that is assembling a consumer profile used for things like getting loans, potentially health insurance, many other parts of economic viability. And indeed, the now infamous Internet Research Agency that mounted a massive information operation during the US election used the ad tech technology to achieve its goals. So in many ways, American technology was used against itself by hostile adversaries. And we see that the advertisers on pages are numerous. The image on the right is a sort of typical hyper-partisan website. Literally hundreds of companies exchanging data about the users, and the one on the left is from Sputnik, which is now considered propaganda of the Kremlin. The backdrop against this, looking at the last 6 or so years, is really the collapse of the newspaper business in a very short period of time. So as online behavioral advertising was created, the business of journalism bottomed out, and in its place, Google and Facebook captured the revenue. In addition, the web is mostly controlled by two companies in terms of the ubiquity of their trackers. So this is the census created by Princeton University, and most of the trackers on most of the sites are owned by Google and Facebook. This data collection allowed them to consolidate power at an unprecedented rate, all to solve Wanamaker's rule, which is to eliminate the waste in advertising. This is the business imperative that creates marketing surveillance. And indeed, the companies truly believe that there is no conflict between advertising and privacy. They truly believe that it is possible to create a micro-targeted advertising world and protect privacy at the same time. And they believe that they can even let advertisers upload your personal data into Facebook to target you on Facebook by name, and that is privacy positive. When the Facebook scandal appeared and Zuckerberg had to testify before Congress, it became more well known that Facebook tracks you even if you're not on Facebook. And the reason they do this is they give you a unique identifier. It's a name, it's just not the name that your parents gave you. It's a name that Facebook gave you. And what this has allowed Facebook to do is actually model the US population quite close to the census. So they have this accurate rendering of the entire country. Something weird happened in summer of 2016. I noticed in May, so about 2 years ago now, that Facebook added a new setting to its privacy settings that wasn't there prior. And it turned out that 2 years ago in 2014, Facebook combined the previously anonymous identifier of our browsing activity to our Facebook accounts. And they, 2 years later, finally put a control on the site to opt out of that. About a month later, Google did the same thing and attached the double-click ID to our Google accounts. And a French data protection regulator noticed the change in the policy, and many of us think that Google did it because Facebook did it. So, so basically a decade's worth of your browsing activity, perhaps, was attached to your Facebook and Google accounts. You were de-anonymized by these companies. This, of course, happened right up to the peak of the election campaign. So we have no idea the effect that this had, the precision that this enabled. Another backdrop to all this that people don't widely understand is a huge problem of ad fraud, that the ad tech industry is deeply fraudulent. In fact, even if you do, oh, can you fix that? Thank you. Uh-oh. I pressed the wrong button, my fault. If you just do some simple arithmetic, there it is. If you do some simple arithmetic, you take the total amount of ad revenue, what goes to Facebook, what goes to Google, what goes to publishers, and then what goes to the ad tech industry, there's $11 billion unaccounted for. That's going to fraudsters, likely organized crime. No one knows the scale of the ad fraud out there. But according to a white hat ad fraud researcher, Mika Kotilia, this chart, if I explain it to you, illustrates it. So this is a chart of random IP addresses out of an ad network. And basically the theory is that a random IP address talking to another random IP address is a human visiting a real website. Whereas a non-random IP address talking to another non-random IP address are computers on data centers talking to each other. And so the blue dots are humans looking at real websites, and the red dots are computers talking to each other, loading real ads, making real money, cheating the whole economy $11 billion a year. Right after the election, journalists discovered that there were hoaxers making lots of money. In fact, these guys were making $20,000 a month, and their only expenses was Airbnb. And they simply used Facebook to create hoax sites that generated easy clicks, lots of ad revenue, and you can see how the duopoly and the ad tech industry enabled this, and we didn't realize it until after the damage was done. In addition, journalists merely took screenshots of ads on YouTube to show that companies like Mercedes were literally funding Nazis and jihadists because those groups were monetizing off of YouTube. And so we created this issue of brand safety in the industry where all of a sudden advertisers had to worry where their ads were running. Prior to this, nobody cared where their ads were running, but as soon as a journalist started looking, everything changed. When Zuckerberg responded on his Facebook page to these criticisms, hilariously, fake ads loaded right next to his statement. These are fake ESPN and fake CNN sites that when you click to them are selling things like diet pills and skin cream. So classic patent medicine fraud. Last summer, a massive data breach was reported that basically leaked the entire Republican voter database. And what this showed us is that the rampant industry practice of linking voter registration files to other data sources to create voter profiles on us, something that's legal in the United States, is not legal in a country like Germany, was a rampant industry practice. So our worst fears were sort of confirmed by that, as well as the fact that these companies have really bad cybersecurity practices and just leave this data out to be breached. And a lawsuit was filed in the United States against the company, and the company did do work for the Trump campaign. This problem occurs in other countries as well. There was a concern that Yandex, which is basically Russian Google, was improperly collecting data on Hungarians against Hungary's data protection law. So this idea of data leakage is this endemic problem in the industry, and it relates to the model of ad tech, that by syncing our identities to serve us ads, we create a very unsafe, polluted environment. And this is really curious. So it turns out that in March of 2016, Yandex tags were added to Breitbart. And we can see that from this tool that tells you the tech on websites and the time that they are there. This is very curious, and later we have learned that Cambridge Analytica and Breitbart had an exclusive data sharing agreement. But why is Russian ad tech on Breitbart? And why did it appear the same time that Paul Manafort joined the campaign? One of the key anxieties about the Cambridge Analytica story comes from the work at University of Cambridge, the Psychometrics Center, which shows that a few Facebook likes can reveal intimate traits. Most people on Facebook think that they are choosing to announce their sexuality or their religion or their politics on Facebook by entering that information. They don't realize that a few likes can accurately predict this. At least this is the research coming out of Cambridge. And this is the model that politicians were excited about, to be able to invasively model people. And this is the reason why 87 million likes were harvested to generate this predictive model. But I would argue that the psychological profiling is not the most concerning aspect of Cambridge Analytica, but rather it's the international nature of it, which is inherently offensive to democratic principles, and also that it's militarized. It came out in House of Commons in Parliament that the technology of the parent company, SCL Group, target audience analysis, was export controlled by the British government until 2015, and it was classified as a weapon. And after that, that same technique was used for elections. So literally a declassified weapon was used upon electorates. So what did we unleash? Many of you may have seen this video. Mute this. Oops, I did it again. We can skip the video. I'm running out of time. You may have seen it. It's Theresa Züger and Jamie Bartlett from the BBC in San Antonio talking about what Cambridge Analytica did. I'm running short on time, so I should keep going. It's okay. I should keep going. I have more to go. So Facebook sells to campaigns its ability to influence voters. It literally advertises itself. We can swing elections. And yet they deny that that's possible when they talk to the press or government. And we also experienced the effect that Facebook had to react to the information operation that was run by the Internet Research Agency, and they needed journalistic pressure to get them to admit the full scope and scale that this campaign had reached hundreds of millions of Americans, and they could not be downplayed as they spent $125,000 on that. That Facebook works because the ads are cheap and targeted. But what was not well reported, in fact, barely reported, is the way that Instagram played a crucial role in the information operation. What we're seeing here is a meme in the upper left targeted to a Black Lives Matter activist. That meme is on an Instagram account that's a fake imposter Instagram account called Black Matters Us. If a deeply engaged user clicks on the profile link in that Instagram account, they go to a fake Black Matters Us page run by the Internet Research Agency. That in turn has Facebook custom audiences trackers on it. That allows then the Internet Research Agency to then upload that data back into Facebook to target those users on Facebook and potentially target them for events, to potentially target them for a fake protest in Austin, Texas, where Black Lives Matter activists were pitted against white supremacists. In that situation, you went from Instagram meme to a protest, and the behavior of people is actually changing. And foreign adversary is dividing the people against itself using Facebook, including Instagram, and the tools that are normally built for advertisers. What was built to sell ski vacations, skin creams, is being used to divide a nation against itself. And just being used as it was meant to be used. This is a graphic from Jonathan Morgan of Data for Democracy, who studies radicalization on Twitter. And this is a neo-Nazi group that became 63% radicalized over the time that it was observed. So this idea that the platforms provide a mechanism for algorithms that the recommendation engines themselves radicalize. Of course, if it wasn't for Julia Ongwen, the journalist from ProPublica, you would still be able to buy ads on Facebook targeting Jew haters. It took a journalist to call this out. And again, we don't have a clear understanding of the data broker industry and the complex voter profiles that are created on us that include our voter and politics. And it's probably the case that Cambridge Analytica bought data from Axiom and Oracle to create the profiles of all registered voters, something that is unfortunately legal. We were also introduced to the idea that slide was supposed to be up about the data brokers. You can see Oracle and Axiom build rich user profiles on us. You can do it. We also were introduced to the idea of computational propaganda, a new development. In this study from University of Indiana, they determined that bots were more likely to be the sources of spreading misinformation. And we also learned that a company recently, it's been disclosed, called Psy Group, which is based out of Israeli intelligence, pitches its services of creating fake accounts and fake news for its clients. So our worst fears. This is a study from Online Privacy Association that was presented at DEF CON, which studied the use of psychometrics on the Brexit campaign and used this idea of the authoritarian personality and found correlations between the psychometric model and the authoritarian personality, and they predicted it very reliably to the outcome of the referendum. In fact, it was 78% predictive, according to their research. And one of the things is that we can understand how psychographic targeting works to manipulate a population. This is a very oversimplified example that they use in the Online Privacy Association. But basically, if you take this idea of, if you ask somebody, do you care about your privacy? And they say, I have nothing to hide. That's a marker of the authoritarian personality. So if you had different ads based on being pro or anti-surveillance, whether you had a high or low authoritarianism, these would be the different messages that you would see. So here are examples of manipulation. This erodes the public sphere because it means that next door neighbors are not seeing the same things. They're not having the same experience of potential policy solutions. So I need to keep on moving here. So where do we go from here? What happens now? Well, last July, I filed a complaint with the British regulator, the Information Commissioner, on July 4th, which is our Independence Day, from my former colonizer. And I said, why is a British company interfering in my elections? I want my data, because British law grants us access to our data. This contributed toward their ongoing inquiry, which includes Canada and Canadian Parliament, because one of the companies implicated is Canadian. So it truly is a transnational operation here, where software is being built in one country, data is being exported to another. Why are Americans not working on their own election? Very strange. So, just earlier this month, the Information Commissioner issued a criminal enforcement order to the executive of the now liquidating Cambridge Analytica and its parent group, SCL, that on June 4th, it has to be compliant to the law and give me all the data that I have been demanding, or face criminal criminal sanctions. So we really are getting accountability at the data crimes level, and the fact that the companies are folding does not let them be immune to these. So I had to raise money for a separate lawsuit that's in the High Court that goes even further than the enforcement order. So we'll see if we need to proceed with that. But having crowdfunding to be able to support this was critical. And interestingly, the funders came from about half UK, half US, and a little from the rest of the world. We're running out of time, but I wanted to talk about GDPR a little bit. A lot of sites today updated their interfaces, and they're supposed to look like this, but many do not look like this, meaning yes or no, and give you your data rights up front. Of all the sites that I've seen today launch, The Atlantic probably has the only GDPR-compliant interface I've seen, period. And actually, Facebook and Google are now suffering a lawsuit from Max Schrems for not being compliant to the law that went into effect today. But basically, you need to be able to opt in to all these different collections. You basically need to give permission to the ad tech web of companies that I showed you at the beginning of the presentation to be GDPR compliant. So I'm going to skip to the end. So what do we do from here? The advertising business model is totally broken. It's eroding democracy, it's eroding privacy, it's eroding journalism. It's totally broken. We need new business models. So the question is, how can non-profits, platform cooperatism, cryptocurrency, making ads GDPR compliant, so we go back to the old way? Could a data tax fund new journalism? Lots of new development and opportunities to create new things now, especially after today. And I'm going to skip this one and just end here with a Marshall McLuhan quote. This was a piece on RT about fake news that had a fake news hoaxer on who later was found dead in his hotel room. And the quote is, "World War III will be a guerrilla information war with no division between military and civilian participation." And so as usual, Marshall McLuhan nailed it. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David, for this quite detailed picture of what is going on. And I think we're going to talk a little bit more about this later in the discussion, but I would like to give the word to Bernd to... Smart man. Yes, to present a more systematic analysis based in the cybernetic theory. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction. So, I mean, you heard the keynote, you heard David's presentation just earlier. And there was a lot about talk about manipulation. So what? Manipulation is basically as old as human history. So what is the news here? And Theresa actually mentioned, obviously, there is a new quality to it. And the reason that we are having this conference at all, and that you people came to join the discussion, shows clearly that many of you at least have a gut feeling that this kind of manipulation taking place on the internet is a new quality. And this quality does not arise from a new quantity, because of course the internet is giving more people the ability to read what more people wrote than ever in any other point in history. But I'm not talking about this quantity, I'm not talking about the speed actually, I'm talking about a new quality. So we have to ask, what is this new quality and where does it arise from? And I'm trying to give a broader picture because I think that this kind of manipulation is just a symptom of a deeper cause. There are much more things which involves the technology behind this kind of manipulation that will affect our daily lives in a very significant way in the future. So I'm trying to give a more broader approach to understand what is happening here. And if we say, okay, this is things that are happening on the internet, so maybe it's a good starting point if we look at what people call the information society we are supposed to live in, right? But I also think that information society is not a good term because it distracts what this paradigm shift is really about. It's not so much about information in itself. It's all about how information is collected, stored, owned, processed, and finally used as an instrument of power in a social context. So that is a much broader view to what's going on there. And so I'm not going to use the term information society from now on. I call these emerging power structures a cybernetic society. This, is, of course, gives us the problem to understand what is cybernetics. So we need to understand what that is. And the science of cybernetics is very closely linked to the name of Norbert Wiener. He's considered the godfather of cybernetics. And cybernetics as a science tries to formalize general principles of regulation and control in systems. And the important point here is that, according to cybernetics, everything is a system. All biological, social, and technical systems, including such complex systems like society and economy, are governed by these same principles and can therefore be represented by a cybernetic model, which can be used to derive regulation and methods and instruments of control in the real system. So to give you just a very short example of what a cybernetic system is, I present something that I'm sure everyone knows. That's the regulation of the room temperature by a heater and a thermostat. I mean, that's very familiar to every one of us, right? So the cybernetic control loop that is implemented in this thermostat heater circuit is trying to keep the room temperature at a certain level. And when the temperature fluctuates, maybe because someone is opening a window or because the insulation is bad or whatever, the heater kicks in and tries to raise the temperature to the predefined level. So that's a very, very, very simple cybernetic control loop, but it shows us two very, very important points as well. First of all, is that regulation and control in a cybernetic system is always trying to achieve and maintain a predefined state of the system. So it's basically a freezing of the status quo, what is happening here. But the even more important point, the decisive question, is never addressed in any cybernetic textbook. It's the question, who decides what state should be maintained and achieved and maintained? That is something that is left out of the technical discussion, but it will get very important when we come to the cybernetic society. But of course, the claim of cybernetics that everything is a system and can be modeled in a cybernetic model is, of course, it's very bold, right? So does that really work? Can we really have such complex systems like society and economy be modeled in a mathematical model? And the bitter truth is that in the early days of cybernetics, it miserably failed. I mean, cybernetics was able to model very small, not complex systems, but it failed with everything that had a certain complexity. It was simply not possible to handle systems with thousands of features in a significantly satisfying way. And it was all academic as well. I mean, it was something very academic. There was very few real-world applications. And I only want to mention one because it's very interesting, because it was one of the first. That was the CyberSyn project in Chile in the early 70s. So they built up basically a cybernetic control loop to steer the Chilean economy, to give basically orders to industries based on consumer need and demand and whatever. We will never know if this system would have ever worked. I mean, they completed it, but the system itself died with Allende in 74 when the US decided the experiment is over. But during the 70s, of course, for cybernetics, it got worse and worse because we had computers and later networks that made a vast amount of data available to cybernetics. And this big data, as we now call it, was simply not could simply not be handled with the formalism of cybernetics. So this sounds like a complete epic fail, right? Why do we talk about cybernetics at all? But of course, this is not the end of the story. And cybernetics frees on more than Wiener could have ever imagined in his wildest dreams. We just do not call it cybernetics anymore. We call it machine learning or even artificial intelligence. But the basic principles of cybernetics are the basis for machine learning. They have the same approach. They have, in a way, the same methodology as well. But the difference is how a model is constructed. So classical cybernetics is very much like computer programming. So you have a mental model of your problem. You take the building blocks of your programming language, and then you write a program, and if it's done correctly, it converts the input to the expected output. Machine learning, on the other hand, works in a completely different way. You basically automatically train a model, which is then called an algorithm, from vast amounts of data. And once the training is complete, the model is able to predict output values for new input values with astounding accuracy. So, interesting to note here is that big data, which was the problem for the advance of classical cybernetics, is now actually becoming a prerequisite for machine learning. That is what I call a success story, because it's converting your worst enemy into an ally. But machine learning comes with a price tag. You got a trained model and it's able to predict output values, but you will never be able to understand why and how it is doing that. A transparent algorithm, something a lot of people demand because they see the problem, is simply an oxymoron. It's not possible. Machine learning is knowing without understanding. You get a result, and the result is obviously correct, but you do not know how you achieved it, or how the algorithm achieved that result. It's completely opaque. But on the other hand, there is a very big advantage with machine learning, because it appears to be universal. The machine learning algorithms can represent any system in the sense of cybernetic system. So the limit is actually your imagination and the available data. And on the other hand, it can be used for any intention. And the intention is a very essential factor for what an algorithm or a model will learn during supervised training. To give you an example, you have normally the situation that you have this vast amount of data, and you have a generic algorithm which is untrained, which is just a classification, like say a neural network. And then you start to train your algorithm with an intent, because you want to know something from the data. And this intent is actually responsible for what the algorithm will learn. So you can use the same generic algorithm with the same amount of data to get two completely different models. Maybe for a bank to decide whether you can have a credit from them, or for an insurer to find out if you get it within the next time. It's the same data, it's the same algorithm, it's the intent that makes the difference for the model. And machine learning has become very, very successful in so many areas. So machine learning is becoming an ubiquitous technology in our daily lives, very often without even us noticing it. It just happens. And I'm not going to enumerate and waste time with enumerating all the areas where machine learning algorithms are used today to fulfill the intentions of their masters. This list is growing faster and faster every day. And in very short time, it will be easier to write a list where machine learning is not applied. Today, we as people using the internet are mostly confronted with commercial algorithms which have access to big data assets. So this, of course, includes the big three: Facebook, Google, and Amazon. And interestingly enough, the data pools, the data these algorithms work on, are actually filled by our own interactions, buying stuff on Amazon, searching on Google, viewing films on Netflix, liking posts on Facebook, tweeting on Twitter, reading email on Yahoo, or whatever that is. It's a source of personal data that never runs dry, because we are filling it actively. And the purpose of the algorithms of these corporations, because they are profit organizations, is very simple. Their intent is to maximize the financial and informational exploitation of its users. That's their purpose. But very early on, these companies realized that because the intent is actually driving the model out of the data, this data, the same data they are using to maximize their profit, could be used by others for their own purpose. So they early entered the data broker business, right? So they are selling information, or sometimes even data, to third parties that are then fed into machine learning algorithms to fulfill the intention of the owners. At that point, at least, we have to redefine the purpose of machine learning algorithms. It's not longer just to maximize the profit, but it's, in general terms, to put the interest of the owner over the self-interest of the subjects, of the data, of the subjects described by the data. So this could happen in an indirect or in a direct way. In an indirect way, it happens without the involvement of the subject, of the person. That's, for example, the case if the bank is using a machine learning algorithm. It feeds in all the data that they know about you, and then there goes a green lamp or a red lamp. If it's a green lamp, then you get the credit. If it's a red lamp, they say, have a nice day. But the more interesting part here is the direct involvement, which actually means that you have to convince the person to act in the interest of someone else and not in self-interest. And that, of course, is a really, really problem, because people do not give up their self-interest. In fact, they never do. So there are only two ways to make people to give up or to surrender parts of their self-interest, and one of them is coercion with physical force, which, of course, is nowadays not longer considered an ethical approach. So it's something that does not actually happen on the internet. So nobody's coming into the American electorate, putting you a knife to your throat and say, vote Republican, right? So that's not the way it works anymore. But the only other options, if you cannot use force or coercion, is manipulation. That's the only other way you can get people to give up their self-interest. And manipulation, of course, itself can come in different colors as well. So you can make the user to believe he's acting in its self-interest. That's basically the mode of operation of Facebook. You all believe we need to have a Facebook account just to keep in touch with our friends and to be part of a group and stuff like that. But in fact, you're acting in the interest of Facebook. They are not interested in what you do with that. They are interested in your data, and they make use of that. And you do not see that. You do not see that your action is not pure self-interest. And the other thing is it could use emotional manipulation. Emotional manipulation is very, very powerful. It goes from very subtle social pressure. Every recommendation system is basically just that, right? It says, friends who bought this also bought that. And so you sit there and think, oh, maybe I should buy that stuff as well. Maybe I don't need it, but my friends bought it. So that's a subtle social pressure. It can go as far as influencing the mood of people. So this kind of manipulation is literally built into the algorithms. But of course, manipulation in itself, because we are talking about humans here, is something that is not directly covered by cybernetics itself. It's somewhat outside of cybernetics. But fortunately, science always also evolved on other areas, like in the social sciences. So there is a toolbox of manipulation that can be used. And the most important one, of course, is the theory of behaviorism, very much linked with the name of B.F. Skinner, and modern methodologies of psychometrics that was already mentioned there. So where you can basically have a system of just 5 personality traits, so-called ocean model, which can be used to classify the personality of a person in a very specific way, which can then be used to basically address the individual with messaging to convince him to do what the owner of the algorithm wants him to do, not to act in self-interest, but to act in the interest of others. So I think we here have the 2 basic techniques of the cybernetic society. So we have cybernetics as the model of the representation of a system, mostly the human behavior, and we have behaviorism, which is basically the instrument for guiding human behavior or directing human behavior in a certain way. And if we put these 2 things together, and that's what's happening not just in the advertisement industry, it happens everywhere, that these 2 things together actually form this new quality we have been asking for at the beginning. It's the automated manipulation of human behavior. It's not that that you try to influence me or I try to influence you or manipulate you. No, this is happening on a vast scale, and it's happening automatically with the help of machine learning algorithms. I would like to talk about how this is actually just the beginning and how it will influence our lives in the near future. I just want to mention one thing, just very shortly. Because you think, well, this is still nonsense, right? There is no one is thinking about setting up cybernetic control loops on a scale of, let's say, a nation state, right? But this is actually what is exactly happening now. China will have a cybernetic control system called the social credit system in 2 years' time, and it's mandatory for every Chinese citizen. Right? So they are using exactly these kind of techniques to control a whole community or a whole nation, a whole society. And in the long run, this will not be limited to China, I'm pretty sure. So that is something we are going to be confronted with anytime soon. But I think this is beyond the scope of this talk. So I just try to express that manipulation on the internet has a technical basis, and that this technical basis is pervasive and will impact and influence our daily lives. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bernd. Yes, I would like to switch the microphones because now I will hand one to Marloes.
Thank you.
Yes, and thank you for this attempt of a broader overview. And I think there's a lot of thoughts that are really challenging us to question where do we stand on the spectrum of a cybernetic society, and maybe also what can we do to prevent this from happening. And we will discuss this a little bit later, but now I would like to hand it to Marloes.
Thank you. I'm going to talk about a game I'm working on called What Remains, and an essay I wrote called How to Escape Reality in 10 Simple Steps. I wrote this essay as part of a web residency curated by Tatiana, and it was at Schloss Solitude in ZKM. And I will show bits of the game, talk about a few strategies, I can't cover them all, and I will try to draw parallels to today's situation, drawing parallels to a technologically enhanced media landscape that does not cause but greatly facilitates the spread of false information. So now I'll try to do this right, yes. Okay, so the research I did for the essay fed into the game What Remains. It's a project by Aymeric Mansou, Dustin Long, Arnaud Guillon, Chun-Li, and myself. It's a darkly humorous 8-bit Nintendo Entertainment System game built for the original console from 1986. It's based on how public opinion was and still is shaped to prevent the creation of government regulation needed to protect us from environmental disasters, but also from other disasters that have been covered in detail by the panel. This project is kindly supported by the Creative Industry Fund and ZKM and Schloss Solitude. So, first a bit of story from the game. You are Jennifer, and you just finished your daily skate session. And as you can see, it is really 8-bit. It's not just 8-bit aesthetics that you see a lot. We have a resolution of 128 by 96 pixels. This is really super cool to develop for. So, while walking over to your friend Michael, a car drives by with screeching tires, and someone throws a package out the window. And, oh my God, it's a Nintendo game. So, you, Jennifer, live in a little town called Sunny Peaks, and you can walk around town, talk to people such as this dude, and you can enter places such as your friend's Michael's house, who just got a Nintendo Entertainment System console for Christmas. Super. So you can also go into the local aerobic studio, and they have an awesome music collection that you can discover at your leisure when playing the game. You can also go to the tobacco shop, and the game integrates these 10 strategies that I wrote about in the essay, and it lets you not just read them and think about them, but it lets you experience them and battle them so you can save the world in 1986. The game is based on industry documents made public through leaks and litigation, and it will be released on original recycled cartridges that we're going to hand solder together to not order more crap from China, but really reusing old materials, producing as little waste as we can. And it'll be open source, and you can also download the ROM for free once it's released, which will be this summer. Why did we pick the 80s? This is a decade in which many of the problems that we're facing today became painfully obvious. The collateral damage of industrial capitalism became visible at the same time as the rise of neoliberalism, which has this strong conviction that unregulated market will solve all problems, even though for many problems there is no financial incentive to trigger this problem solving. Scientists came to the consensus on what causes acid rain, a hole in the ozone layer, global warming, while at the same time campaigns funded by industry cast doubt on the severity and causes of those problems, resulting in immense delays in effective action. So I started to dig around and investigate what kind of strategies were actually used, because they were super effective, right? 30 years of delay for the tobacco industry, maybe even more, and for the oil industry as well. So I started to look into databases online, like the Industry Documents Library at the University of California, which is great, cross-industrial documents from pharmaceutical, chemical, tobacco. It's really amazing. 14 million documents are currently available via this place. And it was really fascinating to actually read the words that were used and not just read a report on it. Okay, so this is the godfather of all documents. It's the overarching strategy, emphasize uncertainty. Merchants of Doubt has described this in great detail, really, really well. Why would you take costly measures that could hurt the whole economy if you're not really, really, really 100% sure about something? And this is an Exxon internal memo from 1988. This selection of documents and publications and advertisements, I put them and tried to structure them and came up with 10 strategies. I used as other sources Requiem for a Species, Oxford Handbook of Climate Change, and of course Merchants of Doubt. Here you see 3 documents linking to strategy number 5, aggressively disseminate the facts you've manufactured. So let's start looking into the document on the left, which is an advertisement of the Edison Electric Institute. And it was published in the Washington Post on the 3rd of February 1982. Acid rain, the real issue is whether you have all the facts. You could order this booklet via the coupon here at the bottom because you want to get all the facts, right? Because you're concerned about this acid rain. Edison Electric Institute is an association that represents all US investor-owned electric companies, and it's still active. It actually is really successful because it has succeeded in rolling back state-level incentives for rooftop solar energy. Way to go. When you fill out the coupon, you would receive this booklet. It's an updated perspective on acid rain, and it was written by Alan Katzenstein. Inside, you find the overarching strategy, again, the denial machine, emphasizing scientific uncertainty. We need more research, side by side with strategy number 10, that we need not do anything that could hurt the economy. Don't do it. Okay, then there's of course always scientific uncertainty. There is no such thing as absolute certainty in science. You only have contemporary consensus until someone comes up with a better model or a better theory. Okay, so you see here a snippet mentioning the fertilizing effects of acid rain, which is pretty uncanny. And my personal favorite, an explanation of the pH values. In the text, it says that acidity has a bad name, but it really shouldn't have, because, you know, tomatoes are acid, bananas and even pears and carrots are acid. And I quote, all have pH values well within the range of the rain that is the subject of scare headlines in popular media. So then there is this other document, Environmental Tobacco Smoke and the Risk of Lung Cancer. How convincing is the evidence? Written by Alan Katzenstein. This guy, he's an expert on anything and everything. So he happened to work for the Tobacco Institute as well. He went on a media tour giving 62 TV, radio and newspaper interviews in which he was presented as an air quality expert. This is strategy number 5, aggressively disseminate facts that you have manufactured yourself. So here he is on TV. It's not the best shot. He has an MBA and he runs a PR agency. So he's really, really not an air quality expert. Here he is on the 5 o'clock news, medical report with Joanne Williams. And the report concludes, Katzenstein admits this debate will go on until statistics will show one way or the other how secondhand smoke affects non-smokers. It is a debate. No, it's not. It really, really, really is harmful. But anyways, so in the game, we have Alan Kittenstein of PR agency Kittenstein Associates, and he's hired by Deny Corp, who has an energy branch, and they're worried about panic about acid rain, because panic is not good for docile consumerism, as we all know. And you receive this information as part of a collection of really secret and encrypted documents. And more recently, strategy number 5 was used by the Heartland Institute in 2012. This is a leaked memo listing their climate science denial campaign work. with detailed payments to federal employees, university faculty, and career climate skeptics. This includes a project in which Heartland rolls out a global warming educational program aimed at dissuading teachers to teach science because they are heavily biased towards the alarmist perspective. So here you see it, again, emphasize uncertainty. And these are just a few examples of how industry manages to influence public opinion with one goal: delay regulations. And so even more recently, who is facing regulations? Mark is facing regulations. And if you compare, you know, the 80s way to aggressively disseminate information to control the discourse about your industry, I mean, this guy has it pretty easy. He owns the channels that determine in a large part the discourse. So this is strategy number 5, like, whew, through the roof. It's a really full control, well, not full control, but good control over the narrative. Here you see the second day, snippet of the second day of the hearings in April, where Senator Dan Sullivan asks Mark, since Facebook takes full responsibility for content published, if he thinks that maybe he is the world's biggest publisher, or is he a tech company? Which one? Which is a really important question in the US, because if you're considered a publisher, you no longer have legal immunity under Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. And right now, he is immune for what is published, but also for what he unpublishes, so he can censor and publish as he sees fit. And that seems as if the online advertising industry has the capacity to distribute harmful material on such a massive scale, and it is so fully automated that by some sort of confusion magic, we cannot hold them accountable anymore. It's really weird. Okay, so yesterday, The Guardian published an article about a court case by 643 against Facebook. And in this case, Facebook is actually claiming that it is an editor for First Amendment purposes, free to censor and alter the content it publishes. So it is claiming, I am a publisher. In Congress, they said, no, I'm not a publisher. We're a tech platform. So which one are they? Zuckerberg said himself in 2010, having 2 identities for yourself is an example of a lack of integrity. So come on, Mark. So how does Facebook and Google and many more use their own platform to shape the discourse about this? They do that by being really, really schizophrenic. They have 2 separate sides. They have a user-facing side and a business-facing side, and they're very neatly separated. On one side, they can avoid taxes, they can accept rubles or whatever currency and take it for political or commercial content, while on the other side they're taking credit for self-organized movements such as the #MeToo movement and talking about community and bringing the world closer together. So back to the game. At a certain stage, we call it the Chomsky stage, you receive information about who owns the local newspaper. The Sunny Peaks Gazette is owned by Fred Rockefeller, the same Rockefeller that owns 80% of DNL Corp. So in the game, you gain the ability to spread the information that you receive by blowing the whistle. Literally, you see on the left, next to the text, you have a little whistle. If you press B on the controller, you hear a little and you spread the news that you just learned. And every character responds very differently to your news. This one is really surprised, like, okay, the newspaper is owned by DNL Corp. Do you reckon that influences what they publish? And other persons, they respond less surprised or positive. Okay, so on to strategy number 8. Seek allies, create connections, also secret ones. Make sure that the other businesses facing potential scrutiny are aware that if you get regulated, they might be next. This strategy is really beautiful because it allows you, for businesses to combine their strengths and resources, and you can also do it in secret. You can actually create the appearance of many independent groups fighting for the same cause. This is really smart. Who would use such a strategy? Well, the 80s example is, for instance, the Consumer Tax Alliance creation. It's a phantom front group made by the Tobacco Institute. This is a 1983 letter from Nelson Padberg Consulting to the Tobacco Institute, possibly like looking for possible funding sources from other industries such as oil, beer, wine, video games, and soft drinks. So all these groups that were created would have sort of a grassroots appearance and a bottom-up sounding names. They were all anti-tax, because tax is really effective at like dumping sales. It's proven. Why aren't we doing it? Bloody hell. Well, because of them. One of those was Citizens for a Sound Economy, a third-party anti-tax tobacco industry partner and a think tank dedicated to the promotion of free market economics, founded not by concerned citizens, but by David Koch of Koch Industry and Richard Fink. It was funded by tobacco, oil, energy and sugar industries. And in 2004, it split into Freedom Works and Americans for Prosperity, that we then got to know very well. Because of the Tea Party. But in 2002, the Citizens for a Sound Economy already launched the Tea Party website. And the Tea Party is meant to be really a grassroots uprising for freedom of choice, less taxes, less government regulation, a real mobilization of well-meaning concerned citizens, which it was, who thought they were fighting elite power, yet the protests were orchestrated by that same elite. And the Tea Party was AstroTurf, hiding its sponsors until a 2012 FreedomWorks document leaked. The Koch brothers and Tobacco Institute were really onto something with the strategy. So there was like a sort of a reenactment of it, but with a really profound impact that was already brought up earlier. It's the Citizens United reenactment. It was founded in 1988 as a grassroots conservative political advocacy group with the mission to restore the United States government to the citizens' control. It was, again, acting as a group of concerned citizens, so-called grassroots, but funded also by Koch brothers and hedge fund billionaire Robert Mercer, the same Robert Mercer who owns most of Cambridge Analytica, donated it to the Brexit campaign and co-owns Breitbart. In 2010, Citizens United won a case against the Federal Election Committee. The court determined that free speech clause in the First Amendment prohibits government from restricting expenditures for communication by, amongst others, corporations and non-profit organizations, opening the door to unlimited spending by individuals and corporations, which led to the super PACs that we now know so well, and it got US politics even deeper into the pockets of big business and billionaires since then. So Citizens United links to another link to today's influencer. Steve Bannon has produced multiple movies together with David Bossie, the president of Citizens United and deputy campaign manager of Trump in 2016. Breitbart called Bannon the Leni Riefenstahl of the Tea Party for his work on Battle for America, this movie, a portrait of the movement. Bannon needs no further introductions here. He founded the Government Accountability Institute with the goal to weaponize information by feeding trash on politicians to mainstream media. He was briefly Trump's chief strategist, vice president on board of Cambridge Analytica, and former CEO of Breitbart. Here, on the other side of the propaganda machine, you have Nigel Farage, who is both really happy and really sad during the EU hearing this week with Zuckerberg. He was really like celebrating the fact that Brexit and the US elections would never have been possible without social media, so hooray. And thank you, Mark. And at the same time, he was really, really sad because he was trying to give people a voice and to fight corporate corrupt elites and the news media. And, but now he won't be able to manipulate people anymore as effectively as he did before, because Facebook has changed their policies on what shows up in your news feeds, prioritizing family and friends over pages and paid content. So, boo-hoo. So how do Facebook, Google, and Twitter seek alliances and use the public to fight for corporate causes? So here you see Randall Rothenberg, CEO of the Interactive Advertisement Bureau, a lobby group with as members all major online advertisers, including Google, Twitter, and Facebook. And he puts it very clearly during his hearing in US Congress, pitching self-regulation against the proposed Honest Ads Act. As much as we might dislike it, propaganda is protected speech. So how could anyone be against freedom of speech, against openness? This confounding of corporate freedom with individual freedom is possible again because of the schizophrenic split between user-facing and business-facing side of these platforms. Corporations are not people. They can be a monopoly, taking rubles for political ads, have massive leaks of user data on one side, while simultaneously taking credit for supporting social movements. So all the attention is on the user-facing side, trying to fix the user-facing side, while the business-facing side is completely, like, it's not completely ignored, but it's really not the focus, and it should be. The business model is the problem. Creating a monopoly, making people dependent on services that are meant for psychological profiling and exerting of unconscious influence over people, and offering this to whoever pays is the problem. And in the game, we've got an AstroTurf stage full of political intrigue that I would love to show you, but it's not finished yet. So you see there the AstroTurf demonstration is still a little quiet, but we're populating the square. Okay, last one, distract. How am I time-wise? Very good. Okay, cool. Okay, so distract attention by putting forward research that either invalidates a concern or points to something even worse than the problems your business is creating. It goes in 3 steps. First, you focus on a problem that is way, way worse than whatever your business is doing to the public. For instance, communism in the 80s was the favorite, terrorism, or foreign threats. So if that doesn't work and people still look at you and start to invite you to congressional hearings, you offer a tech solution to the problem. Third step, if that fails, you mention how people can adapt, because people are adaptable. So here we go. How did that work? In the 80s, this is a report called Changing Climate. It was a report written to inform Congress about global warming. It was written in 1983. And it's an example of how fossil fuel lobby got right into the National Academy of Science report. It had individual signed chapters, which was very unusual, and which made it possible to sneak in 2 economists into a report about climate science. And one of the economists was Tom Schelling, and he wrote this. He makes a very weird statement. Not only have people moved, but they have taken with them their horses, dogs, children, technologies, crops, livestock, and hobbies. It is extraordinary how adaptable people can be in moving to drastically different climates. Oh, thank you, you solved climate change. Okay. In the game, things get even more epic, but we just realized, talking before, that actually reality is often stranger than fiction, so beware. DNI Corp distracts people with an alien invasion. And the only solution, is to nuke the aliens, which will, not coincidentally, generate a nuclear winter, cooling the Earth, neutralizing the effects of global warming, so people can continue to burn fossil fuels, offered by DNI Corp. A technical solution, geoengineering, using the theory of nuclear winter, while simultaneously distracting from the cause of the problem. Okay, so to draw the attention away from the unethical business model that can be used as a weapon by anyone wealthy enough to either pay for ads or pay for troll farms, most testimonies during the November hearings of Twitter, Facebook, and Google focused on the foreign threat, this assault on democracy, violating the country. Here is a quote from Colin Stretch, also talking about a national cybersecurity threat. The tech solution part of the strategy is super obvious. Of course, artificial intelligence is going to save us. Point. And the people will adapt part of the strategy is rather ironic, because we are told that we need to educate ourselves and to learn to detect when we are being subconsciously manipulated. How will that work? Problem solved. And the best distraction of all, while Facebook is being grilled, is Google here, relieved that they're not the subject of discussion, quickly pulls out an AI bunny from its magical hat, because now we can actually make an appointment with a hair salon using AI. It's magic. It's PR theater at its very best. Okay, so, yes. The mission statements of big tech are amazing. Google is trying to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. And Twitter is going to foster and facilitate free and open democratic debate and promote positive change in the world. And Facebook is going to create a technology that gives people the power to build community and bring the world closer together. But those missions address only, again, the user side of their company. The business side talks about another type of user, subconscious, emotional, steerable, and manipulable user. And research by, amongst others, Tversky and Kahneman gives the appearance of legitimacy to techniques that would normally be perceived as coercive. And this research has also led to the application of nudging, priming, influencing mood and behavior on a massive scale. For a democracy to work, we need discussion. And for discussion, we need a shared reality. And for that, we need trust in sources of information, but also a trust in the capacity of people to inform themselves. We don't need nudging or manipulating. We can inform ourselves and think. Our idea of reality should not be shaped by ethics-free venture capital-backed corporations and those rich enough to pay and use them. We could start by refusing this fluid identity for corporations. What are you? Are you a utility? Are you not a utility? Are you a neutral tech platform or are you a publisher? And how will you address us? Will you address us as emancipated, responsible, empowered citizens or irrational, emotional users in the need of nudging in the right direction? So I would like to wrap up with a plea for the support of independent, ad-free media and journalism. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Thank you for this very educating but also entertaining talk. And I think we all want to have the game now. At least I do. And I think you demonstrated something very well that I would like to start the debate with, because I would like to ask you all, so we all realize that propaganda is nothing new, and you kind of gave a perfect example of what one thing is that we can do against this, which is dismantling the strategies, and I think you did a very good job at that. But what are other things that we can rely on to maintain political freedom and to kind of dismantle the tools of propaganda that are in place? You already mentioned GDPR, so maybe a question to all of you. What tactics and what tools do we have on what levels in society?
Yeah, I thought that, your example of the lawsuit is really good, of the none of your business lawsuit. And that's one way. Also getting really familiar with these strategies so you recognize them and you're not fooled by them. And forcing this, just really, like I finished, refuse this fluid identity, because these corporations are always shape-shifting their way around legislations, and of course they can afford, because they have lawyers, but there are now more and more opportunities like the GDPR to try to force them.
I think for me, there's the debate between, will regulation create censorship, which in the US is particularly sensitive, and I've found that addressing privacy issues is a better vector to interrupt the systems and the patterns that I described. So for example, how if the US would adopt a comparable legislation framework to the GDPR, then it would interrupt the underlying technology that allows both foreign state actors, domestic actors, and just opportunists from polluting and exploiting and eroding the sort of key privacy that democracy needs, which is first sort of personal autonomy, like you were describing. And then, of course, sort of privacy in the voting booth, so that that decision remains sacred. And at this time, that privacy is greatly threatened by machine learning, predictive technology, an unregulated Wild West industry that is actively matching all of our data to our voter registration. And until that is interrupted, we will not make much headway in just breaking down the incentives. And the incentives are all built around a business imperative, actually, which is basically so businesses can spend less money on advertising.
Do you want
Actually, I'm not so much convinced that regulation is the the golden path to a better future here. First of all, because what will happen, I mean, Facebook has to follow the GDPR, of course, but most people will actually not change their behavior on Facebook. So they will, of course, agree that the data can be collected and processed with Facebook. So it does not actually change that much. I think the question is, if we want to change that, how far are we willing to go?
What does that mean?
It means, I mean, if you take the Facebook example, I mean, if we agree that Facebook is fulfilling a very basic human need, that's of communicating with your friends and using the benefits of having such a platform, then of course, for most people, it's not an option to not using Facebook anymore, because that would probably be the only way to stop them on that level. And if I say how far you want to go, I mean, why is nobody ever talking about disappropriation of Facebook? Make it a public service under a control, make it a federated system which actually has the technical ability to protect the privacy of the users. If it's such a basic, if it's the fulfillment of such a basic need, that we can consider it a public service, right? But people, I'm not sure if people are willing to go that far. I would advocate for it.
I would like to stay with how people behave, what you addressed a little bit, so the user's perspective, and ask all of you, so if that is the goal of the advertisement industry, to somehow change how we think and change how we behave, how successful are they, and what research do we actually have to tell when these strategies are successful? Because I think the example of China you were giving points is that the context of where these strategies are in action is very, very important. So what arguments can you give about that? Like, what do we know how effective these strategies actually are? Are we all manipulated and don't even know it?
Yeah, I think there are many different answers to that, but one thing that sort of the PR magic that companies like Cambridge Analytica are pulling off, saying like that they know you better than your own mother, that I think that's complete nonsense. I don't think they can predict that accurately, but just like advertising companies, if they're right 2 out of 10 times, it's already really, really great. And but we should not sort of pull out our tinfoil hats or Faraday cages and hide because they can read our minds. It's not that. It's more the social credit system in China. It's the pressure that they can apply, the power they can exert, that if you behave in a certain way that is not socially acceptable by whoever determines this system, so in this cybernetic system, who determines what sort of harmony must be achieved, then you are punished. You are no longer able to get certain privileges like travel outside of China or get a visa or whatever. So I think this is the real power.
The interesting thing about how we can know that certain aspects of the targeting technique works is that it doesn't need to work on everyone. It only needs to work on a tiny slice of the population to have its effect. And when I was describing the sort of what was formerly export controlled by the British government, this target audience analysis technique, it's basically looking for, it's a methodology to identify a segment of the population and to manipulate just those. So one of the things that happens with this debate over whether it works or not is somebody looks at their own profile and says, that's not me, this can't be accurate, whereas it might be accurate for somebody else, and it only needs to be accurate for a roughly accurate. So it's like the idea of predictive algorithms is that it's just a confidence value. So one of the things that I'm fighting for in British court and with the regulator is not just, for example, my psychological score, which was not disclosed when I got some data. need not just the scores, but the confidence values of those predictions. And until we know the sort of confidence value predictor of the whole model, especially in the summer of 2016, we really don't know whether it could have worked or not. But if we do get to the point where we could say their model was 89% predictive, for example, then that would cause some real damage. And especially if you factor into things that Christopher Wiley and Brittany Kaiser have described to Parliament and to the press, if you factor in the idea that they had a data sharing agreement with Breitbart, exclusive, that they were doing cookie matching, so they were literally attaching Breitbart users to their voter profiles and surveying that interaction, then we begin to see the ability to find a tiny slice of the population, surround them with messages that they're responding to, and creating a feedback loop of this iterative process of zeroing in on the people that you could have an effect on and not worrying about the rest. But you need a profile of the entire electorate to find the nudgeables. And that's really terrifying. And then there is some academic research by the original researchers from Cambridge University, Kaczynski and Stilwell, and some others, that have shown that psychographically targeted ads create a higher click-through rate, up to 40 to 60% more than the control, which is significant ability to increase the engagement. So it's not necessarily persuading people, but it is increasing their likelihood to engage with it. And that's a powerful technique, especially if you're trying to find the people that are persuadable. So the increasing the likelihood that they would engage increases the ability to narrow, zero in, and so on. So I think it's important to think about it as it doesn't have to work for everyone, it just has to work just enough to cause some damage.
I think, Theresa, your question had a hidden component. You ask, are these kinds of manipulation are effective? But of course, and David picked it up, it directly relates to the question, did Cambridge Analytica had any effect on the 2016 election in the US, or did the trolls of the IRA had any effect on the outcome of the election? I think this is putting it a little bit into a too narrow frame, because the main actors in these fields are commercial corporations. So they don't actually care too much about politics, only if it concerns them in the case of regulation or policies they have to comply with. But they are using these exact same methods for their purpose of exploiting the users. So maybe the answer to your question is quite easy by just looking at the revenues of the companies like Google, Facebook, and Amazon. This is a very good indication that it works at a very sufficient level. And I agree with David, 100% is not the goal. It's the significant part. It's just to have enough to fulfill your, to get to your goals. So, and I think that works, definitely.
That is very true, but I think the even scarier part is the political manipulation that we're looking at. And so I would divide those two things in how much the advertisement industry owns and gains, and how we see really hardcore political manipulation. And I would like to talk a little bit more about that, because Facebook is trying very hard to push the narrative that Cambridge Analytica was kind of a glitch in the system and it all went wrong. They couldn't prevent it, but it was just this one accident. But there is very good research about the fact that Cambridge Analytica belongs to a group of organizations called SCL groups, and that there is a whole system behind it that is actually in some interviews even very outspoken in trying to push political propaganda that they know from the Nazi regime. And you know a little bit about that, so I would like to talk about this system behind what is happening.
Sure. You know, clearly the militarization of advertising technologies is what's at play, and when you are trying, you know, the quotes that you're referring to came from Emma Bryant, who delivered her research to Parliament, and multiple people in these companies, and Andy Wigmore, who was the communications director for the Leave campaign, literally admitted that it was necessary to create artificial enemies to divide the population. And so it's a divide and conquer strategy. And so finding people susceptible to that divide and conquer strategy to create a false enemy to scapegoat and enable fascist demagoguery through technology is like the new the sort of new dynamic that's really concerning. And then related to that is Bannon's quote that he says, you know, politics is downstream from culture. And so the point is not necessarily to change votes or to, like, that's not the right question. And you can't even know for sure. But the real question is, are they changing culture, and are they changing it at a velocity that is abnormal? And so this is the more complicated narrative, but it's like, did the various vectors at play change American culture so quickly that people didn't even know what happened? And that translated to unexpected electoral outcomes. So that's probably the more concerning thing, is how the mechanisms can radically change the idea of a country.
When we look at Ireland tonight, there is a referendum going on about abortion, and around that referendum was a lot going on Facebook with political targeting and political advertisement, and there was a great initiative by Liz Carroll trying to make that transparent. And what she points out is that this kind of political targeting is not only a national phenomena, but it is also an instrument of politics that are very much international. So I would like to ask all of you, like, is that a new form of political propaganda that is a phenomena of international politics? Or do you see other moments of this kind of political intervention as even more threatening? But for me, that was one of the most threatening parts, that even not only inside a country, but from the outside, there could be involvement in a campaign of an election.
Yeah, I looked up how many elections the US has tried to influence in the past, and they're really winning from Russia, for sure. It's really, obviously they have been. This is really nothing new. I mean, they've been influencing foreign elections already for as long as we can remember, and so has Russia, and so are other countries. I mean, I think geopolitics is not it's not a new phenomenon at all. But again, like, technology makes it can only make it easier. Like Najala already mentioned, like, it can happen with a greater speed, and you can, like you mentioned, target very, nudgeable sections of the population, which is new in a way.
I think that this is, of course, a global symptom, so to speak, because the entities that have the technology and know how to do that are basically global corporations, and I still stick to the idea that they basically prostitute themselves to anyone who pays enough money for whatever purpose. So I'm not sure if Cambridge Analytica had any personal interest, I mean anyone working there even, in any personal interest to swing the election one way or the other. They were simply paid for the service, right? They had the technology, they had the knowledge to do that, so they simply just did it. And that, of course, will be something that will happen on a global scale. And we heard in the keynote in Kenya, Cambridge Analytica was actively in pursuing its business in Kenya. So they certainly had no interest in what is going on in Kenya, but they were paid for their services. So I think this is a little bit, from my point of view, it's a little bit isolated from politics as we understand it usually.
I would like to invite questions from the audience. You want to answer first, but we can also raise your hands if you have a question, and somebody will come to you.
Sure. Just want to dispute one thing, that the Mercers who own Cambridge Analytica, a condition of their investment in the company was that they could not work for Democrats. So it is a partisan entity. So they will work around the world, but they won't work for Democrats.
Just a quick question.
Yes.
Bernd Fix had mentioned in his comments that he supported the expropriation of Facebook. And I'm curious how the other panelists, including the moderator, feels about that.
Yes, thank you. So, you don't know if you understood the question? Bernd mentioned that Facebook is doing a public service, so it should be misappropriated, so like owned, expropriated, that's the right term. Thank you very much.
Should it be nationalized?
Yeah.
Should it be seized
Publicly
and
owned.
made like public television?
Yeah.
Who?
First, if you want to help her out.
No, I'm just thinking like it would already be really great if they were considered a publisher of content, because then they can be held accountable for what happens on their platform in a really different way, like traditional publishers, news media are held responsible. And Facebook is willing to comply with the Honest Ads Act, but that's just, I think, like a symbolical gesture of goodwill, but there needs to be something way more rigorous. And maybe nationalization could be a good experiment.
I would agree that I'll say that it really tests antitrust models in the United States, because antitrust, anti-monopoly in the United States is based on consumer protection and consumer pricing, and we have to re-architect antitrust models in the United States because we don't pay for these services. And so that fundamentally breaks the model that we build antitrust upon. So I think that's a huge challenge. There's talk that Facebook should be broken up, that basically its acquisitions should be unwound, that basically Instagram, separate company, WhatsApp, separate company, Oculus, separate company, their ISP, separate company, that it's the synthesis of these companies and the sharing of data across these divisions that makes the company exceedingly powerful, and powerful beyond accountability, and also powerful beyond people's expectations. So, and just today they announced that WhatsApp data is going to be shared with the parent company, something that they promised FTC 2 years ago they would never do. So, in some ways, encouraging the company to spin it off back into its acquisitions would have a big effect on limiting its influence, because, for example, Instagram is the part of Facebook that is its greatest asset in terms of growth and younger users, whereas Facebook is really an aging population. And so, most Americans don't even know that Facebook owns Instagram and that the data is all shared together. So, I think this would be a more viable strategy in the United States. I don't think there's much appetite for nationalizing it or expropriating it. No, but I would support very vigorous antitrust and privacy and those angles, which I think are more viable in the US system.
I saw 2 more questions, yes.
Okay, mine is very quick. It's a challenge that I received, and I want to, yes. So basically, the the Organization of American States asked me, we want to include in the verification process, in the observation and verification process of free and fair elections, the digital element, all of this. So they asked me, what would you look into during the election, the days before, the election days, and the days after? What will you scrutinize, and who you will ask the questions on how to protect an election and preserve an election from manipulation, from influence, and from bad practices? I don't know if it's clear. Like basically, how we monitor and regulate in an election all of this.
Wow.
I mean, we will, I sort of not answering the question directly, but if it plays out that Cambridge Analytica and its owners are held accountable for breaking US election law, as they probably did, then the system will have survived a key test. But if accountability fails there, then we have a significant problem. What we mean specifically that is US election law prevents non-citizens from participating in election activities. And, you know, Alexander Nix is obviously not an American, but more significantly, there were probably at least 2 data scientists who are UK and Italian citizens who worked in San Antonio, and that would be potentially against election law. So I think it comes down to, like, will the existing infrastructures survive the test that is being, it's like a stress test on what we have so far. And if it fails, then we're in big, big trouble. More direct to the question about how can Facebook be regulated, it would require it to be submitted, it has to submit full data audits. So basically, one of the key things is Facebook has all the data to answer the questions that have been posed. Like, for example, how many Americans were targeted by the Russians and then went to a fake protest? Facebook knows exactly the number of people who did that. They won't divulge that. Facebook also knows which voter files were uploaded into Facebook to then target which Americans on which messages. So the sort of data transparency around election targeting could, you know, lift the veil on these things. And then the other proposal is to ban micro-targeting, period. Because if you did that, then you would eliminate some of the core problems. So if you're looking for the simplest solution, ban micro-targeting. Meaning you could only target large groups. We'd have to figure out what would be the minimum size, but the sort of individualized targeting is really the dangerous feature that was unleashed in the summer of 2016, and we're feeling the reverberation.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. I think that actually trying to penetrate the opaque algorithms of social media companies is hopeless. So I think then banning micro-targeting would definitely be the best option. And yeah, because there's so many ways around, and AI is really not going to, you know, prevent anything like inappropriate content or manipulative content from appearing and fake news from appearing. Algorithms are easily fooled. And shell companies are easily made, so foreign interference can still happen through shell companies. Cambridge Analytica is quitting, but Emmer Data is already up and running behind the scenes with pretty much the same people in the board. So yes, I think we should just stop the micro-targeting.
I just want to add one point to splitting Facebook into multiple companies, or as you said, rewinding the acquisition. Actually, Facebook had published a list of companies they share data with. And this list includes some 1,500 companies. So even splitting Facebook would not stop any exchange of data necessarily. You had to forbid them to do that if you want to make that to have any effect. But I think we are basically at the end of the talk anyway. So maybe I can propose something for the election problem, right? I mean, an election is basically in the view of cybernetics, it's just another system, right? So we have enough historical data on elections and its outcome. So maybe we should spare us the whole effort of having elections at all, right?
Oh, I don't agree to that.
We learned from Kenya how expensive it was to have all these technologies to actually perform the election. So why not have a machine learning algorithm trained on elections, feed in the data of the population, and then you simply see a result. That would be at least a consequential approach to the system, to the problem.
Well, I wouldn't want that to happen because I very much believe that people do have political freedom that is completely unpredictable sometimes. But there was another question. No, you withdraw the question. Is there another question? Yes. Yeah, can somebody bring her the mic?
Yeah, no, I was just interested in the cultural aspect that David was addressing, because I think also it connects well with the keynote of before, by saying that often this kind of form of targeting and profiling is maybe less connected to the algorithm rather than with the creation of a polarization in people's minds. And I think, in a sense, I totally agree that probably that was the case, by really trying to target people to generate a sort of cultural war and polarized opinion. And in the sense, this connects really well with the discourse of hate speech and misinformation. And I say that because I still think that if we speak about culture, then we still have a sort of agency, because I think that, in a sense, we can try to battle this mechanism, also creating a sort of counter culture that is also spreading another form of behavior, of sensibility, and so on. And I am a bit concerned in, you know, and also I have some doubt in thinking that technology is so powerful. So I don't know, Bernd, because I think that if we just decide to give so much power to algorithms, first, I don't know if this is really the case, if actually technology is so powerful. And second, I also think that this doesn't leave so much hope to resistance. And I still believe in resistance. So I would like to understand a bit more what you think about that. If actually a form of cultural resistance is still possible, and how we can work on that kind of field work rather than, you know, feeling no agency because we are, you know, totally a victim of algorithms.
Want to start?
I can just share a news story that came out today that's a little bit relevant. The Facebook's hate speech policy leaked today and was published by Motherboard. And it has a section on how to differentiate white supremacy from white separatism. It has a section on what is an allowable use of Pepe the Frog and what is a banned use of Pepe the Frog. So we see in a glimpse into Facebook its own attempt to censor and regulate hate speech as a sort of cybernetic problem. And of course, this plays out in the marketplace, and that you probably have, you know, Filipino contractors trained to interpret Facebook's policy as the content moderators. So you basically have someone who has 30 seconds to figure out the difference between white supremacy and white separatism, or whether it's a legal use of Pepe the Frog. So the infrastructure is so improvised and so opaque that it's not just about algorithms, it's also about like labor practices. And the fact that, you know, the turnover in these content moderator is so significant because people spend all day mostly looking at violence and porn, and then get a little hate speech nestled in between these things. And they're not employees. And when you listen to the companies say, they never say they're employees. They say, we've hired people. They never say employees because they're all contractors. And they just turn over because the psychological damage about being basically this brain filter, you're like, these people are basically like the liver of the information space. And they're literally like filtering the depravity of humanity so that Facebook can be a clean place for families. And like, it's not just algorithms, it's actually the economy of regulating information that needs to be exposed.
I think we're running a little bit out of time, so you have the last word if you want to, and maybe if you want to come back to this question about how much space is there for counterculture and what tools do we have that we can maybe reactivate.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of space for counterculture because, I mean, this focus on algorithms is almost also a distraction in itself. It's really you know, about the identity of these companies and how they're addressing us. What kind of users are we? Are we being used as sort of to do whatever we're supposed to do, to be nudged, or are we actually held to be responsible people? And this kind of awareness raising and sharing this narrative, which I hope also to do with the game in a funny way, but also in more serious ways, we can do so much work there to stop going for the Sundar Pichai AI magic tricks and the series and all the PR behind this psychometric profiling as well, and to really focus on what kind of businesses are these and how are they addressing us, what kind of vision of people is behind it, because I don't want to be seen as sort of like just a pawn that can be shuffled around a checkboard to achieve a certain goal. I want to be held responsible, accountable myself as well, just like I hold them accountable.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of my speakers, and thank you to the audience for these wonderful questions and for your attention, and have a wonderful night. Thank you, Tatiana and the Disruption Network Lab for hosting us, for having this debate. And yes, see you next time, hopefully.
Yes, I just wanted to remember, first of all, I want to thank you. Now I was into the trip of, the algorithm of curating an event. No, but thanks a lot for this really interesting panel, and we will go on tomorrow with our program. We are starting at 4 with the panel Uncovering Corruption. We will speak about strategic harassment, Mexican trolls, and election manipulation with Andrea Noel and Renata Avila. Then we will actually have 2 directors, Hans Bloch and Moritz Riesenwijk, that directed the film The Cleaners, that is speaking about what you were mentioning. So the people that are filtering the content in Facebook, not only on Facebook, but also on other social media. And also the problem that many of these people are actually working in Manila, for example, in the Philippines, in other countries that somehow the West consider far away. And so it's also a problem of power, I would say, and who detain this power. And then we have a panel that is called Facing Ideology and Strategies of Hate, about hate speech, online violence, and digital rights, with Caroline Sinders, Ovind Stroman, and Kathleen Berger. So we will focus also on the ideology behind hate speech. So please come back, and we will meet at 4 again. And thank you very much for this great panel, also for the keynote of before, and also for all of you that have been here today. Even outside was basically almost summer, so thank you for staying so long. Thank you.